Imagine for a second that society isn't just a collection of people.
Right.
Imagine it more like a giant computer operating system, like this massive complex OS running in the background of everything we do. It basically dictates what's possible, what's logical, and what's considered, a fatal error.
I love that framing because you don't even notice the OS until something breaks.
Exactly. Now, ask yourself, what happens when different nations or even global leaders are running completely incompatible software? Like, what happens when one system tries to execute a command that the other system just can't even read?
Well, you get a catastrophic system crash, and the fallout from that kind of fundamental coding error doesn't just play out in a server room. It plays out in our politics, our global conflicts, and honestly, just the structure of our daily lives.
And that system crash is exactly what we are exploring today on this deep dive. We're looking at a real-time diplomatic collision between Donald Trump and Pope Leo XIV.
It's a wild situation.
It really is. And just to be super clear with you listening right now, we aren't here to argue theology. We are definitely not taking a partisan political side on this conflict either.
Right. No sides. We are strictly unpacking this as a clash of two deeply incompatible operating systems.
Yep. And to help us do that, we are leaning heavily on a brilliant, deeply philosophical essay dated April 20, 2026. It's by the author Xiaoyang Lin, and it's titled Obstructing the Flow of People is Obstructing Civilization.
Xiaoyang Lin really provides the perfect architectural blueprint for understanding why the world feels so chaotic right now.
Yeah, he does.
He argues that human social evolution is basically divided into two main categories of these operating systems. You have the power society, and you have the civilized society.
Okay, let's break those down.
Sure. So the distinction actually begins with human biology.
Yeah.
We possess both an animal nature and a human nature. The Power Society OS is entirely built on top of that animal nature.
Meaning it's all about survival of the fittest.
Exactly. It relies on top-down control, the rule of the jungle, and forced consensus.
I want to dig into what that actually produces, because Lin introduces a concept here that completely reframed how I view citizenship.
Oh, the giant baby concept.
Yes. He says the ultimate output of the Power Society OS is something he calls the giant baby, or Juing in Chinese.
Right.
A giant baby is a citizen who has essentially been stripped of the capacity for independent thought. They view the government as this omnipresent parent.
And they expect this parent to solve every single problem.
Exactly. And when things go wrong, they lack the scientific logic to understand why, so they just, throw a tantrum and blame the outside world.
Well, the underlying mechanics of that system are quite literally designed to arrest development.
How so?
Because in a power society, the ruler or the state absorbs all the decision-making power. And by removing the individual's ability to make choices, the state also removes their ability to take responsibility.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, you cannot learn how a stove works if you were never allowed in the kitchen.
That makes so much sense. It reminds me of the classic helicopter parent dynamic, just scaled up to a national level.
That's a really good way to look at it.
Lin brings up this incredibly sharp analogy regarding how this plays out in certain Asian cultures, too. Often, when a teenager starts pushing for boundaries, trying to make their own choices, the family labels it a rebellious phase.
Right, but from a developmental psychology standpoint, they aren't rebelling just for the thrill of it.
No, they're attempting to individuate. They're pushing against an oppressive power structure to become an independent subject.
Yes.
And the power structure, the parents in this analogy, demands total obedience. So any push toward independence is coded as a system threat.
Or a rebellion.
Exactly. If the oppression didn't exist, there would be no rebellion. There would simply be a natural transition into adulthood. But the defining feature of the power society is that it never allows its citizens to make that transition.
They remain permanent dependents.
Permanent giant babies.
Yeah. But contrast that with the civilized society OS. This system is driven by our human nature. It runs on science, logic, and voluntary consensus.
And we usually call that voluntary consensus a contract, right?
Exactly. To run the civilized OS, you cannot have a population of giant babies. You require independent individuals. You need people who not only make free choices, but actually possess the capacity to shoulder the consequences of those choices.
Meaning human rights aren't just some gift handed down by a benevolent parent state.
No, they are innate. But keeping them requires active maintenance. You have to take responsibility for your own logic and your own survival.
Okay, so we have these two operating systems, the Power OS, full of dependent giant babies operating on top-down force, and the Civilized OS, built on independent individuals navigating voluntary contracts.
Right.
But this isn't just an abstract theory. What happens when a worldview built on universal, boundaryless ideals interacts with a system built on harsh national realism?
Well, that takes us directly into the massive digital collision that just happened between the Vatican and Donald Trump's camp.
Right, the Twitter drama, or X, I should say.
Yeah. So Pope Leo XIV, who, according to our sources, is the first American pope in history, originally from Chicago, actually, he deleted his old X account upon being elected.
But in the digital age, nothing is ever truly deleted.
Never. Donald Trump's team dug up those old posts, and Trump reposted them on Truth Social with a very ominous, simple caption.
Not good.
Just not good.
And those deleted tweets were a major shot across the bow, because when he was a cardinal, the new pope had shared and endorsed articles heavily criticizing Trump's border policies.
He specifically went after Vice President J.D. Vance's theology, too.
Right, and this is where the operating systems metaphor really clicked for me. We are literally watching two completely different sets of source code trying to process the concept of a national border.
Yeah, let's break down the Pope's operating system first.
Okay.
It essentially represents globalism or theological idealism. It is rooted deeply in Christian universalism. That's the belief in right. Therefore, love must be ordered logically. You must first love and protect your immediate family. Once they are secure, you extend that protection to your neighborhood.
And then to your city, your fellow citizens, your nation.
Exactly. And only after those concentric circles are secure can you focus on the broader world.
Wait, so J.D. Vance's underlying argument is that if you refuse to prioritize, like if you try to treat everyone equally everywhere with zero boundaries, you actually end up neglecting the people you are directly responsible for.
That is the core of the national realist argument, yes. An operating system without borders or priorities inevitably collapses under its own weight because it ignores the reality of limited resources.
Wow.
And the analysis video brings in a stark real-world argument from Tom Homan, the former border enforcement official, to back this up.
Yeah, he passionately argued that the concept of open borders is far from a victimless utopian ideal.
He pointed to the catastrophic downstream effects. Massive human trafficking operations, cartels gaining unprecedented financial power, and the fentanyl overdose crisis sweeping across the U.S.
So Homan's argument essentially highlights the mechanism of the crash.
Exactly. The Pope's ideal of unconditional borderless love sounds beautiful in a theological debate, but implementing it as policy ignores the order of love.
Because when you strip away the boundaries without having a globally shared framework of accountability, the most vulnerable people suffer immensely.
Security and resources have a very real cost.
The critics in our source video pointed out a glaring irony regarding all this too. The Vatican is its own sovereign state, and it is surrounded by massive, historically fortified walls.
Yeah, you absolutely cannot just wander into the Vatican without passing rigorous security checkpoints.
Right. Yet from behind those heavily guarded walls, the leadership is criticizing secular nations for attempting to build their own barriers.
The Vatican's walls represent the pragmatic reality of maintaining an operating system, while their rhetoric represents an idealized universal OS.
And this friction perfectly illustrates one of Xiang Lin's most provocative and honestly counterintuitive warnings.
Oh, about being a good person.
Yes. He argues that blindly trying to be a good person can actually be the very thing that destroys civilization.
That line is intense.
It stopped me in my tracks. Like, how can being a good person destroy civilization? I need you to unpack the mechanics of that, because on the surface, it sounds completely backward.
I get that, but it comes back to the concept of the shared framework. Right and wrong do not exist in a vacuum. They only exist within the logic of a specific operating system.
Okay.
So the Pope's idealistic unconditional love is a highly advanced utopian concept. But applying that concept into a world where billions of people are still operating on the power society OS, the rule of the jungle, it disrupts the entire societal system.
Okay, let's go back to the tech analogy for a second. It's like trying to run a beautifully coded, modern app, let's say an app designed to automatically distribute resources to anyone who asks on a server from 1995 that has no firewall and no authentication protocols.
That's a great way to look at it.
The app has great intentions, but because the underlying system has no way to verify who is making the requests or hold them accountable, malicious actors just write a script to drain the server. The good app crashes the whole machine.
A very accurate way to visualize it. Applying unconditional open borders without a shared framework of mutual contracts is like removing your authentication protocols.
Right.
Lin points out that international laws, like the UN Charter, suffer from this exact flaw. The UN Charter was written under the assumption that the whole world is running on a civilized OS.
It assumes everyone plays by the same rules.
Exactly. It assumes all nations share a baseline where people can communicate rationally, respect borders, and honor contracts.
But in reality, many nations are still running that power society OS. They operate on top-down force, not voluntary consensus.
So when a civilized nation tries to play nice and apply this blind goodness or universal charity to a power society, the power society simply exploits it as a weakness.
Because true civilization requires a framework of mutual contracts and accountability. You cannot achieve peace or stability simply by being nice.
Right. Trying to force a utopian ideal into a reality that requires structured responsibility just breeds chaos. And this circles back to the giant baby problem we talked about earlier.
How so?
Well, if you tell a population of giant babies to be endlessly loving and giving, they don't possess the independent logic to set boundaries. They advocate for policies that drain the system because they expect the parent state to magically handle the cost.
Oh, I see. They advocate for the good app without understanding the server costs.
Exactly. Guiding people toward individual independence is the only way to build the capacity for true consensus, rather than just blind obedience or blind charity.
But this raises a massive logistical problem. If the world is full of these clashing operating systems and full of populations conditioned to be giant babies who have never been allowed to develop independent responsibility.
How do we ever upgrade?
Yes.
Yeah.
How does a power society actually transition into a civilized society?
Lin's essays suggest that sometimes the transition cannot happen from within. He brings up the MacArthur model.
MacArthur, like the general.
Yeah. After World War II, the existing power society in Japan was so deeply entrenched and the populace so conditioned to obey top-down divine right orders that rebuilding a democratic, civilized system organically was practically impossible.
Okay, so what happened?
An external force, the U.S. military led by General MacArthur, had to step in and effectively install a new civilized OS. Lin even speculates about this model potentially being applied to Venezuela following a hypothetical removal of Nicolas Maduro.
Wait, I have to push back on that. How does an external military force actually install a culture of voluntary contracts and free choice? Doesn't forced civilization fundamentally contradict the idea of independent individuals making their own decisions?
It is a total paradox, and it is incredibly messy.
I mean, yeah.
The argument is that when a system lacks a critical mass of independent thinkers, the structural framework of civilization, the courts, the Constitution, property rights, they must be externally imposed like a scaffold.
So they force the structure until the people catch up.
Basically, the citizens are forced to operate within that scaffold until the giant baby conditioning wears off and they learn how to run it themselves. But forced installation is a brute force method. Lin argues the ultimate goal for humanity is the human OS or HOS.
A truly global, civilized operating system built on genuine communication and consensus.
Yes.
But Lin also drops a heavy philosophical reality check on us regarding why true consensus is so incredibly hard to achieve. And it all comes down to the biological limits of perception.
This part of the essay is fascinating.
It really is. He notes that when a dog looks at a green lawn, it doesn't see green. Due to its specific visual receptors, the dog sees beige.
Right. And a bee flying over a garden doesn't see the vibrant colors we see, it sees ultraviolet light.
So the grass itself has no inherent color until a brain decodes the visual signal. We do not experience objective reality. We experience a highly subjective biological translation of reality.
And if our basic physical perception is that subjective, just imagine how subjective our complex thoughts and feelings are. It's staggering.
Which brings us to the failure of language. Lin references the philosopher Wittgenstein, who compared language to a broken clock that is only right twice a day.
Well, let's walk through the mechanics of that because it's crucial.
Okay.
If I say the word freedom, I am taking a wildly complex subjective image built from my specific life experiences and encoding it into a sound wave.
Right. And when that sound wave hits my ear, my brain decodes it, but I decode it using my life experiences, my cultural background, my biases.
Exactly. The image generated in my brain will never perfectly match the image in yours. We operate under the illusion that standard language allows for perfect communication. But most of the time, we're just talking past each other.
Our decoders are mismatched.
Totally mismatched. This is why the UN fails to find consensus, why the Pope and Trump are screaming in different frequencies, and why you can argue for hours with your own spouse without getting anywhere.
Because standard language is just too ambiguous to bridge the gap between our subjective realities.
Yes. And historically, because we couldn't agree naturally, the power society used force or strict religious dogma to mandate consensus. You will agree or you will be punished.
But Lin proposes a technological breakthrough that he believes will change the trajectory of human history. And it isn't a new political theory, it's artificial intelligence.
Lin does not view AI merely as a sophisticated search engine or a text generator. He views it as the ultimate third-party translator.
Explain that.
Think about the early days of e-commerce. Sending money to a complete stranger on the internet was terrifying because the trust gap was too wide.
Oh, yeah, you had no idea if you'd actually get the product.
Exactly. Then third-party payment systems like PayPal or Alipay emerged. They held the money in escrow, they guaranteed the contract, they completely solved the financial trust gap.
And Lin argues that AI is going to solve the communication trust gap in the exact same way. AI will act as a cognitive escrow.
Right. It won't just translate English words into Mandarin words. It will analyze the deep subjective intent behind what person A is trying to express.
And it will perfectly translate that intent into a structural framework that person B's specific brain can accurately decode and understand.
By removing the ambiguity of language, AI forces a new global contract of understanding. It becomes the bridge between incompatible operating systems.
That is mind-blowing.
Once you remove the friction of being misunderstood, you establish the baseline for the true human OS. A global civilization where individuals can forge clear, voluntary contracts with anyone on Earth.
Eliminating the need for a top-down power society to force them into line.
Precisely.
AI is the third-party escrow service for human truth. Just imagine a world where you can finally be perfectly, truly understood by anyone, anywhere, no more broken clocks.
It's an incredible vision.
It really is. So what does this all mean for you, listening right now? The conflicts we witness every day, whether it's an argument at your kitchen table, a polarized political debate, or a geopolitical collision between a former U.S. president and the Pope, they are all clashes of incompatible operating systems.
They're failures of translation.
Exactly. And the actionable mission for you is clear. You must refuse to be a giant baby. Do not wait for a massive power structure to dictate what is right or wrong, and do not expect the world to endlessly accommodate your subjective reality.
You have to cultivate yourself as an independent individual. Figure out your own order of love. Build your own internal framework of logic, boundaries, and contracts.
Because if you simply apply blind goodness without logic or boundaries, you aren't actually helping the civilized system. You are just opening the server to malware.
Very true. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a lingering question drawn directly from the implications of Xiaoyang Lin's philosophy.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've discussed AI stepping in as this perfect cognitive escrow, right? Creating a flawless human OS where true consensus is finally achieved and the ambiguity of language is erased.
The ultimate upgrade.
But if AI eventually succeeds in creating this perfect system where no one is ever misunderstood, what happens to the beautiful, messy uniqueness of how you perceive the world?
Oh, wow.
If the dog, the bee, and the human are all forced into one universal translation to ensure perfect societal efficiency, do we lose the very individual independence and subjective beauty that civilization was built to protect?
Does the ultimate upgrade to our operating system end up deleting the code that makes us human? Something to ponder as you navigate your own reality today.